Okay, so we have everybody, Miss Brenda.
Yes, we have everyone.
Okay, great. All right, welcome everyone to the West County Wastewater District Planning Committee, and we can call it to order. What's the official time, Miss Brenda?
6:11 p.m.
Okay, so may we get started, please?
Great. Agenda item is Pledge of Allegiance or observation of moment of silence.
Okay, I will take a moment of silence. Thank you, madam. Okay, next item, please.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, approval of agenda order.
Can we see the agenda, please?
I'm sorry, Vice President Sedif, did you say something?
May we see the agenda, please, on the screen?
Oh, okay. Hold on one moment. I don't have the agenda on the screen.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm on route.
Yes.
So I can't see it.
No problem.
Brenda, I have it up if you'd like me to share it.
That would be great, actually. Great.
So the agenda is approval of agenda order, followed by public comment, followed by 4 is discussion, receive an update on the negotiation of the project labor stabilization agreement. Then matters from staff, general manager, report on issues or matters pertaining to the work of the committee. Matters from members of the committee, including reports on issues or matters pertaining to the work of the committee and future agenda items.
Perfect, thank you. Director Zepeda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as is.
Okay, I concur. So I believe we can move to the next agenda item. Thank you so much.
Great. Agenda item 3 is public comment. And Madam Vice President, we do not have any public comment.
Wonderful, thank you so much. We can move forward
Great.
with the next item.
Next item is agenda item 4, discussion. That's receive an update of the negotiation of the project labor stabilization agreement.
Okay.
So, sorry.
No, you're fine. We're receiving
okay,
this report
start.
from.
So before we
receiving
yeah.
the report.
So before we start, it'll actually be Andrew and Claire, but I also wanted to introduce on the call Jerry K. Phillips. Jerry is with Hanson Bridget, and she has been working with Claire and Andrew on the project labor agreement. So she has joined our call today as well. So I just wanted to take a minute to introduce her and welcome her. And then I will hand it off to Andrew, who is going to start the discussion.
Welcome, Ms. Jerry. Thank you so much, Ms. Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. So West County Wastewater is currently in active negotiations with the Contra Costa County Building and Construction Trades Council to discuss a project labor agreement. The purpose of the agreement primarily is to promote the efficiency of construction projects through the use of skilled labor, hopefully resulting in quality construction outcomes, to avoid labor disputes that could delay completion of construction projects, and to provide for the peaceful settlement of labor disputes and grievances without strikes or lockouts. And this is essentially when they refer to a stabilization agreement what they're talking about is, labor peace, it's stable, and that's a portion of it. We're going to talk about a title in a little bit. The agreement will also, the agreement will apply to construction contracts that are valued at $1 million or more. And that's construction contracts, not service contracts, like with engineering firms and various things like that. Those are operations or services and maintenance. Although we had a maintenance agreement greater than $1 million, it's might actually be a construction contract at that point. I don't know, but it depends what we were doing with it. I don't foresee a whole lot of maintenance agreements coming close to $1 million unless we're entering into a multi-year event. The agreement also provides for employment priority for workers living or residing in the area served by the district and or Contra Costa County. It is important to note that the actual language in the agreement is that the unions will do their utmost to meet the objective of no less than 25% of all hours. It's not a guarantee or it's not an enforceable provision, but they are committed to making the attempt, as they put it, the utmost to meet that objective of the local hires. We've been in discussions for a little while here, but we're close. We've made, I think, a lot of progress. We've been back and forth a few times with red line agreements. We talked again today. And what we wanted to talk about was a few of the areas where we are still having some discussions and the reasons why we're still having discussions and what the purpose of that is. One of them is the title of the agreement, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. The project labor agreement, a stabilization agreement, what's in a name and why does it matter? Threshold amounts. And as I mentioned, we said that this would apply to construction contracts valued at $1 million or more, but a big part of what we're trying to work through is clarity. Well, how do you define $1 million? Is it the lowest bid? Is it the engineer's estimate? Is it the lowest bid plus the add alternates? Does it include contingencies? What about change orders? And all of these things we want to make sure are very clear and we understand how they're applied, because we have every intention of fully, applying the project labor agreement and adhering to the requirements of it. But we need to make sure we understand what those requirements are, because there will be some in that threshold question. A big part of that is what they're referring to as an integrated project. In other words, we can't be splitting a project up for purposes of avoiding the labor agreement. I have a project that looks like it's going to cost $1.8 million. So I bid out two projects at about trying to do them at $900,000 each, so I avoid the PLA. We have no intention of doing that, but we do have projects that at times we'll package in different ways. They might be a little bit smaller, and for operational reasons, and we've done this a number of times in the past, that we might want a contractor working in a particular basin, and it's primarily going to be pipe lining, cured in place pipe versus pipe bursting. And we want to make sure that the prime contractor will typically say has to have 30 to 40% of the contract. And we want to make sure that the prime is a cured in place contractor. We don't want to get Joe's Concrete to bid the project, have the lowest bid, and then subcontract all the work for the more technical, difficult portion of the project, the cured in place pipe. We might want to package that so that we have one, that this area, the primary work is cured in place pipe. In this area, the primary work is pipe bursting. And that would be for operational reasons that we would choose to do something like that. And so we're working that language with the Trades Council to make sure that we have some flexibility in there. And if we don't, with that flexibility and understanding, I shouldn't say the word flexibility, because we're not, like I said, making any attempt to try to split a project. But when we have a project that we have of a certain size and it's for operational reasons, we want to make it clear that that's why we did it and that there's reasons why at times we'll have those. So we're just trying to work through that language so we're all on the same page and make sure we have a clear understanding. A couple of other areas are covered work and excluded work. In other words, which work is specifically covered and which work is specifically excluded. for the most part, this is pretty clear and we don't have any issues and we think we can work through that language. It's the trades. It's for a construction contract. We're going to build something, not something we're going to maintain, not something we're going to operate, but something we're building. It has a start and a finish. You come in, you construct it, you commission it. It's good. You're done. But we have another contract that we're in the process of negotiating with ENGIE, our energy services contract, which is a $50 million construction contract that also will potentially have about $8 million worth of operations and maintenance in it. And there's a number of other things within that contract about electricity, utilities, solar panels. Where does the conduit run? Is it inside our property, outside of our property? Which parts of this work is covered and which is not? And it isn't so much, again, that we have any issue with it having the PLA apply, but we need to make sure that it's very clear where it does apply and where it doesn't apply. And we want to make sure that this agreement, which is primarily designed for an ongoing labor agreement for all projects above $1 million, and then we have this one very large contract, which is an unusual contract for the district. And we need to make sure that this one-size-fits-all project labor agreement does not create a problem for that particular contract in the way that we're contracting for it. We don't think it will. We think that we've had some good discussions with the Trades Council. They understand what we're talking about, the portions that we refer to as operations and maintenance. They're in agreement that that doesn't apply for a lot of reasons, but we just need to make sure that we have the clarity in the agreement and that understanding, because what we want to avoid is, just like I mentioned earlier around labor piece and the stabilization, we want to make sure that when we are in this energy services contract and trying to implement that project, we don't run into a lot of surprises and internal feuds about, whose work is this, who should it be, is this applied, is it not applied? We need to make sure we have clarity on that now. And we're working through that, and I think we're making a lot of progress. The last item would be the duration of the agreement. I think that's something we'll talk about a little bit more here. The rest of it, there's a lot of things that we've talked about. We made changes to definitions of the project manager, a few other things on how arbitration process would work, things like that. That we're able to work back and forth and come up with an understanding. And a big part of that is we want to make sure that the district is in a position where we're going to implement this agreement, but the district has never had an agreement like this before. We don't know quite what it's going to take to fully implement it. And we want to make sure that we're not in a position where we're setting ourselves up for some liability because we failed to implement a certain portion of it, or we forgot to do something. Not that we expect to do that, but again, good fences make good neighbors. We want a good agreement. We want a good understanding of what's in it and how we're going to implement it. The concerns around the duration of the agreement is the last thing that I'll just touch on briefly, and then I'll turn it over to Claire or Jerry or to Director Vice President Sudduth or Zepeda if you have questions. But the board has given us direction over the summer that they don't want us to enter into evergreen agreements, that they should have a end date. So that's something we have to consider. Right now, what's being proposed by the Trades Council is this is essentially an evergreen agreement. Goes for 3 years and then automatically renews unless the district takes an explicit action to terminate the agreement. We're a little concerned about that because we want some time. One, we think it's not consistent with board policy. Two, we want to be able to evaluate the impact, in part for things like, are some of our local contractors still bidding on projects or have they gone away? And that's important to us because although this will clearly encourage union labor, the jury is out on how much it will encourage or actually create local hires. Is it going to be more or less than when we hire the WG, the Fords, the Andys, these construction contractors that are located in Alameda and Contra Costa County? They're more likely to hire local workers than some of these big contractors that are coming from other counties that would come in and take some of these larger jobs. That being said, we don't know exactly. We want time. We think it would be good and in the interest of the district to be able to evaluate that. And if everything's going well and it's being implemented and it looks good, it's easy to extend it and say, yep, we want to keep moving. But we don't want to block ourselves into the point where we don't really have a good option to do that, or we have to take a assertive action, an affirmative action to actually terminate. So the other things on that we'll look at is the administrative burden. This will have an administrative burden. It will have an impact on project managers. There are additional tasks that will have to happen. There is some contract compliance we'll have to pay attention to. We're not a city with a contract compliance unit, so we have to bring that up to speed and make sure we're capable of doing that. Do I think we are capable of doing it? Absolutely. Do I think we'll do it properly? I hope so. But, you know, we want to just take a look at what that is and how that plays out. The main concern there is how much additional staff time will it take, and will that potentially delay other projects? Not because we hired a union contractor versus our regular contractor, but what kind of impact does it have on our project delivery system? And I would say initially it will have an impact as we come up to speed. I'm going to guess that after we're doing it, after a year, 2 years, it probably will become pretty routine, and it won't have much of an impact on us at all. We'll sort of build it into the project management delivery system. But we want to see that for ourselves and see what kind of impact it does have. And then can we determine if there has or hasn't been a fiscal impact as far as the cost of the construction contracts themselves? I don't think we can really quantify that. It's very difficult. You get an engineer's estimate, you put it out to bid. The vagaries of the market, you know, we have certain trends that we can say, but one contractor is particularly hungry right now and will be bid low, and, you know, other ones, they're all busy at the moment. So to be able to say that, oh, well, it created a 5% increase in if we didn't have a PLA, I think would be very difficult. Those kind of numbers are hard to come by. I think the main thing we'll be looking at there is what's happened to our local contractors. Are they still bidding on any of our projects, or have they just gone away? And but we want to have a chance to look at those things before we just say that, yes, let's enter into this evergreen contract. So that's the I think the main five items and areas. The rest of the items, I think that we can come to an agreement on. We just have to go back and forth with some wording and some other language. But these are the ones we'd like to have a little bit more discussion and bring you guys up to speed on. And so if you had any questions, we can take those. Or I don't know, Claire, if you had anything that you or Jerry wanted to add at this time.
Thanks, Andrew. I think that the most important thing I wanted to be able to tell the committee members is that I feel that we're very close. The remaining items are, well, I would say our negotiations with the union have been very positive. The general manager previously introduced my colleague, Jerry K. Phillips, who's on right now. And Jerry's one of our, it's a public meeting, but I can say this, is one of our secret weapons, because she's actually negotiated with this opposing council before in connection with the Trades Council. So Jerry's been around the block on this, and she's negotiated project labor and project labor stabilization agreements previously and knows this attorney. So I think that's been a real help. Obviously, we're different than a lot of the other entities, especially general purpose entities like cities and counties. And so I think some of the places where we were apart were just due to a lack of understanding of how each other works. And so I really think that we've gone far on this, and these remaining issues are really resolvable in relatively short order. But making sure that we could seek direction from the committee and then the board on Wednesday, it was important to make sure that we were following your direction in terms of these things like what Andrew was talking about, especially things like the duration and how we avoid potentially getting ourselves into a situation that is intended to be beneficial, but then creates more exposure. We usually don't want to talk too much about that in open session, and these are recorded, but we did want to make sure that we were bringing back to the board an agreement that fit with the goals and perspectives of the committee and ultimately the board. So we wanted to make sure that you all knew that we've made very good progress, and we're very optimistic about getting this wrapped up quickly. And if you have any legal questions on this, we can answer them.
Ms. Jerry, did you have anything to add before we go into questions?
Nothing to add, actually. Andrew summarized everything beautifully. The points, the remaining sticking points, if you even want to call them that, are really just fine-tuning of negotiations so we can come to a final agreement. And the great news is that both sides are really highly motivated to get to a finalized agreement as quickly as possible. So we spent a couple of hours this afternoon actually working through some of those finer details post Thanksgiving, and so hopefully I'll cross my fingers and knock on wood, but our goal is to get this wrapped up very, very soon. We're highly motivated on both sides to get that done.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would add to that that the intent is that we're going to bring an agreement to the board on the 16th. Is that 16th? That's the right date, yeah. So that's what we're hoping for, and at this point, that seems doable. But we did want to discuss these few items with you.
16th of December?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Director Isabella, do you have any questions or comments before I speak? Sir?
So thank you, Jerry, good to meet you. Thank you for helping us along with this. Andrew, Claire, Lisa, thank you for helping get us to this point here. And I might have missed it, but Andrew, would you mind telling me again about the title agreement? What is it that's on that? What do we want and what do they want?
Okay, I'll give you a very short answer, and then I'll turn it over to Claire because she seems a little more passionate about this one. But these have typically been, a project labor agreement has typically applied to a single project. These labor agreements are applying to programmatically, in that they'll keep going and apply to every project over a certain threshold. And the Trades Council is starting to use the term, they want to refer to them as a stabilization agreement. And essentially what they're referring to when they say that is that they're creating stability on the project site by promoting labor peace. By, yes, you're going to use union contractors, but they're also signing the dotted line here to say that the union's going to work everything they can to provide for peaceful settlement of labor disputes, et cetera. So that's the stabilization part. But there's reasons why we would still like to keep labor in the title, and I'll turn that over to Claire.
Thanks. Well, so we have historically generally known these as project labor agreements. And to my other clients, we would negotiate them exactly as Andrew said, project by project. You have usually a very large project. The unions were very involved in making sure that they had a seat at the table and that union labor was going to be considered equally or on a priority basis. And so each agreement would relate to that specific project. This now covers all the projects over a threshold. And what I found a little bit distressing was that they were just called project stabilization agreements. Well, to me, working on infrastructure, stabilization is what you do to make sure that something doesn't fall over. There was no visibility to the public that this is really an agreement that's about labor. And so it may sound like a silly thing in a way, but I thought it was important that we keep the word labor in the title so that anyone reading our agendas or reading about a project stabilization agreement knew that it was about labor. I just felt like it's misleading to call it a project stabilization agreement and not include the word labor. After all, they're a labor union. And so that they've taken that back, but we were trying to sort of get our minds around why would a labor union not want to have the word labor in the agreement. And so I'm not sure that it's it's a die on your sword issue, but I do think from a public perception perspective, that making it clear that we are working with labor to make this work is important. But in the end, that's a decision for the directors.
All right. Does it have any, other than perception of the public, does it have any legal connotation, any legal ramification in the back end if we call it one thing or the other? Because it sounds like they might be moving towards this new wording for all their future PLAs. And we might just be sort of at the beginning of this wave as they go in and they negotiate with others is what I'm thinking they might be doing. I doubt we're the first ones or the only ones.
Yeah, they have been calling them stabilization agreements in different places for 20 years, in fact. So it just depends on how they brought it. But Jerry, I think you had experience with there's a whole different set of titling. What was it called? Like a regional workforce agreement or something?
Yeah, there's a cottage industry. I guess every region develops its own euphemism for it, but in San Mateo County, they call it community workforce and project labor agreement. And so even though, community workforce was the lead, we still had in there that it was a project labor agreement. And so it might be, again, something that they're trialing or testing out, this new terminology, but calling it a project labor agreement, that is what we're doing here.
So are they open to adding labor back into the title? Is that what we're getting
They
from?
said they would take it back.
Yes.
They said they would take it back and talk to the CEO about it. So again, I don't think it's going to be, like a burn the house down issue. My perspective on this is, we talked about Caesar's wife last time, not your wife, but Julius Caesar's wife. And I just want to make sure part of sometimes legal defensibility is just making sure that transparency is clear and that we're not, we don't want to be accused of hiding the ball. And that's really, again, it's not a strictly legal issue. It's a little bit more of a perception issue. And that's why I do feel a little bit passionate about it, but I feel more passionate about the duration. Because that's the one that we.
So sorry. So under and I'll get to the duration here in a minute too. So under the agreement, are we able to call it what they wanted to be called with a AKA PLA? Like, just different variations of the same thing. I get where you're going, Claire, and I like what you're saying because most people know PLAs. I mean, I've been working with the public sector for a while, so PLAs is a big word. I mean, when I first started getting involved, they were like, "Do you know what a PLA is?" And I was like, "I don't know what those stand for." So now there's changing the words, so it's important, right? So yes, there's definitely power in the name, and there's meaning in that name. So anything you can do to come up with something in the middle. So thank you for that.
And that's where we are now. Is that? Oh, I'm sorry. That's where we are now with that hybrid. So we wanted project labor agreement. They wanted project stabilization agreement. So we called it a project labor stabilization agreement. Just kind of married the two together.
Perfect. And Andrew, you were saying?
Well, when you said it's, there's a lot in the name, exactly, a PLA. If I said, oh, we just entered into our PSA, that's a public service announcement. And so it doesn't send, we say we're entering into that or we're applying our PSA. And that's really where Claire's coming from, is we want to send the message that we entered into a labor agreement. And what does that mean? So, we'll see where they go with it, but we're actually, I would think, arguing in their favor on this one, but, we'll see.
Perfect. Thank you for that. In regards to the threshold amount, will you be able to, and I know that we have less than 20 minutes here, but will you be able to provide something that sort of shows what we need, what we want, and what the trade is asking for? So when we present this to the board on the 16th, I want to make sure that we're very clear so we can, otherwise we can drag this on for hours and hours and there's part 2 next year. We want to make sure that the board gets really clear, like here's what we're suggesting, here's what the labor people want, so we can see the differences and what we want, so we can move that along a little bit further without getting too much into the weeds.
Well, yeah, this is a
sorry, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I'm sorry. I think by the time we're at the 16th, we're not going to be far apart on anything. That's my sense, given the pace of the negotiations to this point. And I think making sure that we're representing what this committee wants to see out of this, especially on some of these core terms, is I think that clarity on the $1 million threshold really matters. As your lawyers, we really care about that because we're trying to avoid litigation, not find ourselves with new opportunities to get sued, right? So trying to create a lot of clarity and predictability on that is one of our core concerns. But I do think it's doable. And I just think we need a couple more rounds. So you mentioned, laying this out for the board. I guess it's my assumption at this point that there will be few, if any, or little, if any, daylight between our positions by the time we get to the 16th. That's my hope.
That's essentially what I was going to say a little differently, that hopefully we'll have negotiated that so we don't have to lay out where we have a discrepancy. But that's what we want to do here, is give you an idea of where we may have one and if there's any strong feelings one way or the other. And then hopefully we're going to work that out. And there is a lot of detail in the weeds of that one definition. We've gone back and forth and had strikeouts and then changed them back. And really the key is clarity. We want to make sure, how do we define $1 million? And I'll give you a simple example, is if we have an engineer's estimate of $900,000. Well, in many places, that's what they use for the PLA if it's $1 million threshold. What was the engineer's estimate? And then the bids come in, and the low bid was $1.1 million. Well, then you go to the board or your city council with a $1.1 million contract, but the PLA didn't apply because the engineer's estimate was below that. You don't know what's going to happen. So we're probably going to have something, a hybrid of that, where we say it's that or it's the low bid, which could be over $1 million. But then we have to package our documents differently. And quite honestly, if I'm that close at an engineer's estimate of $900,000, we will probably just apply the PLA at that point and just say it applies and bid the project. But there could be an example where we get the bid back at $950,000, it didn't apply, but we add a 15% contingency, which is available so that the general manager has authority to enter into change orders up to 15% of the contract. But that's not actually the contract amount. We don't know if we're going to spend that amount. So it could be conceivable that we come to the board with a contract for $1.1 million or something like that, but the PLA didn't actually apply. And so we just want to make sure that's clear and we can explain that to the board, and that language is in the agreement that makes it clear that that's what would happen, is the way you determine $1 million is based on these factors. Do all the alternate, like we've had some bids come in recently where the project, the base bid, is $600,000. But then we had two other parts to it, what we call alternates, add alternates. And there may be, they bid on that project, $150,000 for add alternate 1 and $100,000 for add alternate 2. So that's another $250,000 on the contract. We may never use that, but we have the contractor in place and we bid it. What we're going to agree to, I would prefer not to have those in, but we said, no, okay, we'll agree to that, because we're basically defining the project at that point. It's a base bid of $600,000, and we might do this other work, and we know we might do that other work with this contractor up front. So it seems reasonable to say that would be included. Now, we may not do it, but it also make us think about, we do that because when we have a contractor, we often can get a much better bid for those spot repairs or the other work that we see along the project that might come up that's uncovered, and we say, okay, you already gave us a bid for that, we got a good price for it, go ahead and do that work. But what the Trades Council wouldn't want us to do is say, you got those alternates, and then you come back, and you add on to a contract, you get a $900,000 contract, and then you say, oh, by the way, I'd like you to do $300,000 of work for this other piece, and now your contract's up over $1.2 million. That would be a violation. That wouldn't be okay. Now, if it were change orders that are just like, you didn't change your scope, but you ran into problems. You were digging the trench, and you hit it, you found out you had a network of gas lines nobody knew about, or you ran into rock that you can't get through without a lot more work. And so you issue a change order. We didn't change the scope of the project, but it potentially could have gotten up, say, over the threshold if it were close. That would be okay. We didn't violate, the spirit of it or the letter of it, because we were on the same scope. We just had problems during the project. But what we're trying to avoid, and we understand, is that you can't split a project to stay under it, and you can't have a project where you stay under it and then add a whole bunch of change orders that put it way up above the threshold in another way. So the change orders would just be things that were worked on as part of the original scope, but we ran into problems or small items that we wanted to fix along the way. So that's the kind of stuff that we're talking through with them, so we have the clarity, because once we implement this, we want to implement it properly. We want to make sure everybody's in agreement. Like Claire said, I think that we're going to work this one out. I don't think we'll have to come to the board on the 16th and lay out a couple of scenarios and go through the detailed definitions like this. It's the kind of stuff that we're hoping we can negotiate and not have to do in that manner. But we just want to give you the heads up that that's the kind of stuff we're working on, and it is taking us a little effort and time to detail those things out.
All right, thank you, Andrew, for that.
Director Zepeda, I know we only have a few more minutes. I do want to say something. Do you have anything else?
I do, but go ahead. We can share the time. Go for it.
Okay, so a couple of things what Andrew just said. So I just want to say this so that, and I'm not sure if you guys covered this when you were talking to them, because what you just mentioned, Andrew, it would be illegal anyway, because you can't bid split anyway. Under the public contract code, you can't bid split. So that's against the contracting rules anyway. You can't. And if it goes over that threshold, you would either have to resolicit or you would have to amend the contract. So that I don't think is it. The other thing is that I know you're talking about alternates. So you have the base bid, the alternates, and then you have allowances. So I think that when you're talking to them, you want to include that allowance in there as well. So when you're talking,
what do you mean include the allowance?
So you have alternates. Alternates is a little different from allowance. Allowance is that extra amount that accounts for the unforeseen. So what you just, that's what you just said, right? You don't know if you're going to get in there and you're going to hit a pipe, or you're going to hit. There's going to be something in there that you have to repair that you don't know about. You're going to have some asbestos in the building or something like that. That's an allowance. So when you're doing major construction, usually it might be 15% or something like that, right? So, but technically, when you bid out work, and you're going to know if it's going to hit that $1 million cap or not, but you're not allowed to bid split so that you fall under any threshold anyway. So if that's their issue, that would fall under the PCC anyway, the Public Contract Code. So I would reassure them from that standpoint. But what we were talking about earlier is that from an operational standpoint, we can't allow them to tie our hands on being sure in being able to approve projects as needed for the operation of the district. And if the district needs to approve a project at a price point of $600,000 this quarter, and then another one at $600,000 2 quarters from now, then that's what the district needs to do. More so what I'm concerned about, and what I would like to make sure that we talk about before this comes, that we make sure we clarify before this comes to the full board on the 16th, is 2 things. Standing by this term that we are not going to do evergreen contracts. And in Cesar, we talked about this this past year, and we talked about it last year with, this was something that when this first came up, when Director Leonard McNeil was here and we first brought this up, was the most that we're going to do is a 3-year plus 2 consecutive 1-year options. Is not a 2-year option, it's 2 consecutive 1-year options, which is actually the preference of the public contract code if you look it up. And that is, one is to see where we are, but the other one is to make sure that what we're doing is a fair and reasonable use of the public money, so we can do that assertion after that 3rd year. The other one is this notion that we're using the union shop, these merit shop contractors, and I brought it up when they came before us to ask about the PLA, and asking about women and other underrepresented businesses in the area, Black, Indigenous, Latino, veteran-owned, businesses owned by people with disabilities who may not be part of their merit shop union force. And when we talk about local hire, I mean those local hire. I don't mean just the people who are in their union shop. So if that is not included in their definition of union shop, then I'm not going to agree with it. They need to make sure that part of that 25% is giving business to these other shops. And they, as a condition of that, they do not have to join that merit shop business. We talked about that. They agreed to it. They said it when they came into our chamber that we could work that out and include it in this agreement. I'm not sure if you were there, Director Zepeda, but we agreed on that we would be able to make sure that a percentage of the local hire would come from these small businesses. And that DBE, SBE, women-owned, veterans-owned, disability-owned businesses would thrive from our local area. And I stand by that very firmly. And so if they're not talking about that, and I do not want them having to go through their merit shop in order to get a job. They need to go to them and give them a percentage of any work that's going to be coming through prime contractor, subcontractor, or whatever. And so that needs to be part of this agreement. And that's what we agreed. This notion of we will endeavor to give 25%, that will not fly in West County. You're not going to endeavor, you will do. You will do. And then we will look at it. Each year, you will report it into us what you have achieved. Or we will need an out clause. We will need a termination clause. Termination for convenience, termination for breach, termination for force majeure, termination for lack of funding, all of it. But we will need an out clause for the district. Because if they are not giving if they're not giving work to local hires, if they are not engaging in the marginalized small business, if they're not doing what they say they're doing, then we need a way to get out of it. Director Zepeda?
Let's see what they have to say on the percentages and on their definition of local hire. We have,
and then my last thing is with the title, I'm agreeing with all of you, but if it doesn't have labor in it, we don't want it. That's the whole purpose of it. I mean, they came to us asking for a project labor agreement. And honestly, what I really like is some kind of phrase in there besides the title project labor agreement, something that says community benefits, because that's what the community wants. Some section in there that says how the community is going to benefit from having this project labor agreement. And the way that we section that is by having local hires. So that local hire should be under that community benefits part. We're not just going to give you business and for $1 million contracts if the community itself is not going to benefit. It's not good enough that's just not good enough. And I'm saying that as a wife of a union longshoreman, and I'm saying it as a mother of one. I'm just not going to guarantee you contracts if you're not going to guarantee that Black, Indigenous, Latino women, people with disabilities are not going to also benefit. So that's what we promised our community, and that's what we're going to deliver. People with, marginalized communities also deserve to benefit from this. And if they're not, then no.
Claire, did you want to respond maybe a little bit on the agreement about the having to become part of the union, the sole bargaining? We went through that, or maybe Jerry, maybe you'd be more appropriate because we had that discussion earlier. As far as the local hire, that's why I called that out at the beginning to be clear, is that it specifically says that it's the objective to have not less than 25%, including apprentice hours, will be worked by residents of the local area, and they'll exert their utmost efforts to recruit sufficient numbers. So that's the language that we have, and that's the standard language that they're pretty much putting into most of their agreements. It's not a guarantee. It's an objective,
Yeah.
and it does not specifically address some of the underserved populations that you're referring to. It just
I know.
refers to there's comments to hard hats, and there's you know, the apprenticeship programs, and then there's this 25%. But there's not another section as what you were referring to. I don't know if you want to add something to that, Claire or Jerry.
Andrew, that's what they had before. And when they came before us, they had that language, and I asked him for more. And he told me they could change it. He told me that they could add more.
Well, thank you for providing that clarity. I mean, there's certainly something that we can work on our side. And specifically, when I was going through iterations of the agreement, I noticed that there is comparable language to what you're describing for Contra Costa County generally when they have their contracting process. And so we can probably borrow some language from there and try and incorporate it. Of course, we'll have to talk with them, negotiate, but I appreciate the clarity on where you stand there, and we can certainly work towards that end.
Thank
Knowing
you.
that that's one of our objectives.
And Jerry, maybe if I can make a suggestion about listening to the meeting where they originally presented the idea to the board, where we wrote it, so we can get some of that actual verbiage.
Okay.
Because I think that it's their intent, right? And I think that what they would say is, we put the bid out there, but if nobody of a certain group applies for it, there's nothing they can do, right? The project still has to move forward. All they can do is put it out there and make sure that everybody has an equal, fair chance. But if at the end of the day, maybe, you know, a group A or different businesses said, look, I'm super busy, I can't put something in. We can't hold their fire to that because nobody gave them a bid to the project. Right, so figuring out that language there, but making sure, as Vice President said, is saying as well, that they do come back, at least trying to say, look, we put it out there, we try to work with all these different groups. What do we do now? Right, so just figuring that out. Because I know when I've gone out to bid for other projects, some groups just don't, some companies, not just groups, but some companies don't put out bids because they're busy or something. And then we have to wait and rebid again. So, you know, just thinking of that language there. But I see we have 2 more minutes. I'm not sure we have anything else, any closing statements or anything from anybody?
Let me just mention we've got 2 days until the Wednesday meeting where we're presenting this as an information item to the full board. And I think that, you know, Jerry and I can make, you know, a real affirmative effort to connect with, to look at the old board meeting where this was discussed, Director Zepeda, to examine the Contra Costa example and to really take these comments to heart and see what we can do in the next 24 hours to potentially bring back something with clearer language to the board meeting. And we can then discuss that further if it sounds like that's jointly the direction of the committee.
Yes, and there's actually, there's more than one. There's 2 meetings. There was one with Director Leonard McNeil from last year. That was earlier in the year. I'm not sure when that was, Miss Lisa, but it was earlier in the year. It's like January, February. When we
Yeah, we've been talking about this probably for a couple of years at different points, so it may go back a way.
And then
was that a committee meeting or
No,
a board meeting? I'm sorry.
Board meeting. That was a board meeting, and then we had it. They came to the board because I know I was at a hotel at a conference, and I called in. The one that Director Zepeda is referring to earlier this year. When they came back in February again, I think they were about a year apart, to be honest.
It could have been, and I think that may have been when the board took action.
Yes.
Well, I think there was a presentation even before that.
Yeah.
There have been a couple of visits. I mean, we've been there a few times.
Yeah.
So.
I will look through my notes. So we are at time, and I want to be respectful so that we can sign in on time. So I am going to recommend that we adjourn for now, unless anyone has anything else.
Can I just say
May I
thank you
ask?
to everyone for working on this? Andrew, especially, thank you for working on this project. Claire, thank you for helping out as well, and Jerry,
Yes.
so thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Hey.
Ms. Claire, you had a question?
Yes, two things. One, I just want to ask District Clerk, do we need to sign into a separate meeting to go to the general board meeting, or do we just stay on this?
No, it's a separate meeting.
A different meeting.
Okay. And the second thing I wanted to say was that Director Zepeda,